Oracle Recovery Manager, otherwise known as RMAN. And this nugget will talk about why we would want to use the RMAN tool as opposed to just going to the operating system level and performing your backups there. RMAN is a really neat tool because it can keep track of all of your backups, including your server parameter file backups, your archive logs, your data files. And so when it comes time for you to perform a restore or a recovery, all you have to do is give the commands to perform that, and you don't have to remember where everything is. It keeps track of all that for you. Think of this as being OnStar for your backups. When you run the Recovery Manager, you can actually run it in two different modes. One is the catalog mode, where you actually have a database dedicated to keeping track of your backups, or you can use no catalog mode, which uses your control file to keep track of all that stuff. So we'll talk about the differences between those, and I do recommend using the catalog mode. After that, I'll show you how to register your database so RMAN is aware of that particular target database, and then we'll connect to our RMAN catalog and our target database. Now there's specific configurations you can provide to RMAN that pretty much gives the default behavior, and you can always override that in your own special script. So we'll talk about how to see what your configuration looks like and how to modify it. Then we'll look at some basic RMAN commands such as backup, copy, restore, recover. You can even duplicate a database to the same machine or onto another machine. So RMAN is much more useful than just backup and recovery. And if you're using the catalog mode, then you can utilize the RMAN data dictionary views. So we'll look at several of those views, and these will be useful if you need to generate reports, maybe send out an HTML email to say, hey, this is the result of your backup, whether it failed or not. So let's first of all talk about catalog versus no catalog mode. Your RMAN tool can keep track of the backups of more than one database. Imagine that you've got 200 databases in your company. You can use this RMAN tool to manage all of those backups. Now imagine that you're using no catalog mode to manage this. Well, remember, all of this information about your backups is going to be stored in the control file. So if you're using no catalog mode, it can grow rather large. If you are going to use no catalog mode, there's only one parameter that you really need to worry about, and that is the control file record keep time. Okay, so control file record keep time specifies an integer, and that represents the number in days that you're going to store information. So the default value is 7, and this just means it's going to store 7 days worth of information. Now it can go up to 365 days, so if you're using RMAN for your backup, set it to this larger value. And you would just modify it with an alter system set control file record keep time equals 365. Let me show you real quickly how you would connect to RMAN using no catalog mode. RMAN is invoked at the operating system level, and this executable file is actually in the Oracle home bin directory, and so that's why we can execute it from anywhere. So you would say RMAN, no catalog, and then you specify the word target. Now your target database is going to be whatever your SID is set to, your Oracle SID. So my Oracle SID right now is set to ORCL2. And then you provide your username and password. If you're using OS authentication like I am, you can just do / like this. Okay, so I am connected. Now once you're connected to RMAN, all of the commands that you use to back up and recover and all that are the same, whether or not you're using catalog versus no catalog. Most of the time, companies are going to be using the catalog mode, so that's as far as we're going to cover as far as no catalog mode. So let's go ahead and quit to get out of there. So let's get back into our SQL Plus again. Okay. What I'd like to show you next is how to use a catalog to manage our backup and recovery. So if you're going to use catalog mode, you want to have a database that's dedicated to RMAN. So remember our database creation assistant? I'm just going to launch that GUI, and I'm just going to create a real basic database from here. Great, we have a welcome screen, and we're going to create a database, a general purpose one. I'm just going to stick with all the defaults. Global database name. Let's call our database RMAN. .johnson, because that Johnson is the name of my machine. So my SID is going to be rman. Let's remember that. Go on to the next page. And we won't even bother configuring this with Enterprise Manager. We don't care about that. And let's just put in a password. Put whatever password you want to. And we'll just use the basic file system. Okay, we'll keep everything at their default values. And let's also enable archiving. And we go on to the next. Now, we don't care about the sample schemas like Scott and HR and all that. Doesn't matter. And we always just get that warning. And we click Finish. And this will just take a few minutes. Great, our database is created. Now to test it out, we can set our Oracle SID equals rman, and then log in as a sysdba. Okay, great, we were connected. The next thing we want to do is create a user, and typically we call this user rman. So we'll say create user rman, identified by, and then a password. Let's give a default table space of users and a temporary table space of temp. And now we can grant resource and connect to rman. A couple other things you want to do to allow the rman user to manage the database. Keep in mind that this user is going to be writing to the default, whatever their default table space is. So you do want to say alter user rman, quota, unlimited on, and whatever the table space is that user is using. Okay, so then you also want to grant the recovery catalog owner privilege to rman, so this user can actually manage and maintain the rman database. At this point, we can get back to our OS prompt and launch rman. We're going to say rman, and we're using catalog mode, and then we have the username, which is rman, @ to say we're using a service name, and remember our database name, our service name here, is rman. We're prompt for the password that we gave a couple steps earlier. And then we're connected. The actual rman database has not been created. I mean, the basic skeletal structure of the database has been created, but all of the user table names that rman owns has not been created. So we need to say create catalog. And this will do the job for us. Now, after we run this create catalog, we can then view our tables to see what we own. There's going to be a bunch of views called rc underscore. Great, it was created. So let's just go to our SQL plus command again, and we'll say SQL plus rman @ rman. Once again, our password. And we can say select table name from user tables. Okay, all sorts of cryptic looking tables. Let's look at our views. Select view name from user views. Now this is what you would be querying if you're trying to do a report on the successful backups. We'll look more at this at the end of this nugget. Well, our tables and views have been created, but it's not aware, our rman tool is not aware of any of the databases that we're performing backups on. So we need to once again get into rman, and we can connect to both the rman database and our target database that we want to back up at the same time. What we want to do is set our Oracle SID to be the target database that we're looking to back up. And then we say rman. We're going to connect to the catalog, rman @ rman. And then we're also connecting to our target database. And if you're using OS authentication, just do a /. I provide my password. And at this point, in order to make rman aware of this database that we want to back up, we need to say register database. Let me show you one of the easiest commands to perform. If we want to see what the basic data files are for our database, we can say report schema. And there's everything right there. We can take care of the wrapping here. Okay, I just widened my window and now you can easily see what's going on here. So we've got 5 data files and we have 1 temp file. The RB segs just means yes or no. Does it contain rollback segments or undo segments? Both of these do. Let's assume that you had 10 databases that you wanted to be registered with RMAN. What you would do is perform the set Oracle SID for each one of those one at a time and then say register database. Once again, this RMAN tool can manage the backup and recovery for many databases, not just one. Now we're ready to configure RMAN and run some basic RMAN commands. RMAN has some default behavior that's determined by what your configuration is set up as. For example, if you want to see your configuration, all you need to do is say show all. So let's go through these one by one. Your retention policy is a window, and it can either be a window of time or you can say redundancy and then a number. So here we're saying we need to have at least one backup of our database and our archive logs and all that. If you said retention policy to redundancy 2, then that would be 2 copies. This is going to be important when you issue commands such as delete, obsolete. Another feature we have is backup optimization. Now, you can either have that on or off. If it is on, then when you're performing a backup, if you already have a copy of something, RMAN's not going to bother copying it again. So this really could save a lot of time. Your default device type to disk, well, that can either be disk or SBT if you're using a tape device. You can specify whether you want your control file to be automatically backed up. And you can also say what the format of that control file backup is going to look like. Our next configuration, device type disk. This just means that whenever we are backing up to disk, this is the behavior. So parallelism 1 just means we'll have one process performing the backup. If you want it higher, if you have much more of CPU on your machine, by all means take advantage of that parallelism. Backup type 2, you can either say backup set or copy. Now, a copy is the same thing as an operating system level copy. The only difference is that that copy is registered with RMAN. A backup set is RMAN's proprietary format that only RMAN can read. A backup set does take up less space and it is faster than doing an image copy. Our next configuration, data file backup copies for device type disk 2, and then you put a number here. This just means that if you're using the optimization, you're just specifying how many copies you want to have before it's considered obsolete. In other words, if you have this set to 2, then when you have your backup optimization on, then if you already have 2 copies of what you're backing up, RMAN's not going to bother copying it again. You can also tell RMAN how large a backup set can grow to. So in our case, it's unlimited. If you have this set to unlimited, the size is actually going to be limited by the OS level. So if you have a really large backup, you might end up with more than one backup set. Something new to 10G version 2 was the encryption. So you can turn on encryption just for higher security. So the only user who can perform restore and recovery is the same user who performed the backup. Then we have a deletion policy for our archive logs. This is going to be used more often when you have a standby database, so this is kind of out of scope of what we're covering. And then our last configuration is how we want to back up the control file. And so this is going to be the location of where the control file is going to be when we have our auto backup turned on. If you want to modify any of these configurations, it's quite easy. You simply say configure and then the attribute. For example, I want to say configure retention policy to redundancy 2. And we say show all, and you see now that it's been changed. Another way we can configure our retention policy is to give a window of a number of days. For example, we can say configure retention policy to recovery window of 28 days. Let's modify another configuration attribute. So we'll say show all. Let's turn our auto backup of our control files on. So configure control file auto backup on. So now whenever you issue a backup or a copy command within RMAN, or you have any structural change within your database, RMAN's automatically going to back up your control file. So you'll see that it's pretty easy to configure the default behavior of RMAN. Now that you understand how to configure your environment, let's look at some of the more common commands we can issue in RMAN. Now there's lots more commands than this, but these are the main ones that you'll be using. The most obvious one is backup. So you can back up the whole database, you can back up a data file, you can back up a control file. There's all sorts of things you can back up. And if you just type in backup semicolon, you'll get a list of all the different choices. Let's first of all just do a full backup of the whole database. So let's go ahead and just say backup database. Now if I don't provide a tag name for it, then RMAN's going to provide a really cryptic name for it. So it's best to give it a name. I'll call this full backup. And it tells us which channel it's using. And it started the backup set. Now since I have a pretty small database, it's probably just going to have one backup set with one or more pieces to it. Now for a small database, this might take several minutes. So you can imagine if you've got a database that's in the petabytes, it can take hours. And in that scenario, you would want to perform incremental backups, which I'll show you in just a moment. It tells us the file number of what it's backing up and the full path of the data file. And now it's started to copy the control file and the SP file. Finish that. And there we go. Earlier we talked about incremental backups conceptually. I'd like to implement it. Let's assume that we have a backup plan where every Sunday we do a level 0 incremental, which is basically a full, and then every day after that we have a level 1 incremental. So we say backup incremental level equals 0 database, and let's give it a tag name. We'll call it a tag equals Sunday. And then we'll go ahead and perform this. It'll take about the same amount of time as a full backup. And it's almost finished, just working on the control file and the SP file, auto backup. And now it's done. So now let's assume it's Monday and we perform the incremental level 1. So we say backup incremental level equals 1 database, and let's give this a tag name. We'll call it Monday. And almost finished here. And so at this point, all you'd have to do is create either a cron job or an Oracle job that performs these incremental backups nightly. You can also say that you want to back up a specific table space. For example, if you want to back up the user's table space, you can do that. Let's also give that a tag. The easiest way to see the things that you've backed up is to do a list, backup, summary. The keyword summary is just going to get rid of all the fine-grained details, and just pay attention to the tag on the right-hand side. So you'll see here that I've got some tags that are that cryptic name I was telling you about, but you can tell that it's the year and the month and day. We can also back up the archive logs. That's something we really should back up. They're very, very important for recovery. If you want to back up all of them, you'd say backup archive log all, and once again give a tag name. That single quote up there doesn't matter. It's just going to ignore that. I accidentally fat-fingered it. It ignored it because I already typed in the semicolon. So now it backed up my archive logs. Notice also that it copied the control file and SP file once again, because anytime you issue the backup command and you have the auto backup turned on for that, that's going to happen. You can verify the existence of your backup by performing a cross-check backup. And here it's just going to tell you whether the backup piece is available or whether it's expired. Expired means that this information is in the RMAN repository, but it can't find it anywhere on the operating system level. So when something is expired, you can't use it. Now don't confuse the word expired with obsolete. Obsolete just means it's outside of that retention window that you defined. for example, if you said that your retention level is redundancy 2, then if you have a backup that's 3 backups ago, it's now obsolete. Let's go on to our report command. Earlier I showed you the report schema, which shows you which data files are in your database. You can also say report need backup. This will tell you which data files need to be backed up according to your window. So here we said that our window is 28 days, and this is fine. It just means since we have no results, our backup is fine. Now if any data files came back, then we would want to go ahead and back those up. Our list command can tell us which backups are expired. In other words, which backups are showing up in the repository, but it's not on the operating system level. So we can say list expired backup. And nothing came back, so that's a good thing. Then we have the catalog command. The catalog is just simply saying, okay, maybe we manually performed a backup on the operating system level, and now we want to register it with the RMAN repository. Or perhaps you had some archive logs that were filling up a mount point and you had to move them to a different location. Well, in that case, you would want to catalog them to the new location. Let's see where our archive logs are right now. So we'll say list archive log all. Okay, so in this directory, the ARC directory, we have one archive log. What if we move it on the OS level? This happens all the time. A system administrator will say, hey, this mount point's filling up. Oh, we need to just move everything real quickly and don't even inform the DBA. So I'm just going to take this file and I'm going to move it somewhere else. Let's move it directly under the admin directory. Okay, we can close that up. So the next step is to perform a cross-check to try to synchronize the repository with the actual operating system level. So we'll say cross-check archive log all, and see where it says validation failed for archive log. That just means that in the repository it sees the archive log being here, but it's not seeing it on the operating system level. We know that this file has moved. We want to uncatalog this entry, and then we want to catalog the correct one. So to uncatalog it, you actually say change archive log sequence, and then the sequence number. You can actually see the sequence number right here, so it's 31. Uncatalog. Then we want to catalog the proper location. Here we can say catalog, archive log, and then the full path to where it is. So this is under Oracle Product 1020 admin, and then the name of this file right here. I'll just copy and paste. After this, we can perform a cross-check just to verify that it's okay. So let's do cross-check archive log all. And it tells us that our validation succeeded. So this looks great. Let's look once again at what our configuration is set to. So we say show all. And our retention policy is a recovery window of 28 days. I'm going to go ahead and change this to be the bare minimum, which is retention policy to redundancy 1. The reason why I'm doing this is so you can see what the delete obsolete command can do for us. Right now I believe we have just one backup of our archive logs. Let's go ahead and back up our archive logs again. So backup archive log all. We won't bother with the tag name this time. If we say report obsolete, it's going to show us everything that has been backed up that isn't necessary anymore for a specific retention window. And really what this is doing is this extra data here is just taking up space on disk. So we do have the command called delete. We can say delete obsolete. Okay, now it asks us, do you really want to do this? Now if we had said delete no prompt obsolete, then we wouldn't be prompted for this. But yes, I'm sure I want to get rid of this. Free up some space. After this, we can then say report obsolete to see if there's anything else that's obsolete. Nothing is there. That's good. Another really powerful command is the duplicate. For example, if you want to just clone a database, at the RMAN prompt you can say duplicate target database to, and then the database name. And you can even do interesting options such as skip certain table spaces. Let's say that you're duplicating a database that's on the same machine as a target. The new data files would have to be in a different location. So you would have to use the set new name command to specify the new location for the data files for the new database. So these two commands together are really useful in cloning a database. Now in our next nugget, we'll talk in more depth about how to restore and recover our database, but just keep in mind that these commands are available from RMAN, and you can perform restoration and recovery on the database level, data file level, table space level, control file, SP file. And what's so wonderful about having RMAN manage this for you is that when you're in a panic and it's 3 a.m. and something's going awry with the database, you don't have to remember where everything is. RMAN is keeping track of all that for you. One of the big advantages using RMAN with a catalog is that you have access to all these views that start with RC. It belongs to the RMAN user. All it does is it gives us metadata about our backup information. Imagine that your company has a couple hundred databases and you need to manage the backups of all of those databases. Well, it gets quite easy with RMAN and the catalog. You can write a quick script to dig into these data dictionary views and get the results that you want. For example, rc_database just gives us information about which databases we're backing up with RMAN. We're going to dig around in our data dictionary at RMAN's views. So let's launch our SQL Plus, RMAN at RMAN. Remember RMAN, that second one is the service name, and our password. To find out which databases are registered, we can say select name from RC database. ORCL2 is the only one, but it's not limited to just one database. In fact, if we wanted to have RMAN back up itself, we could do that. We can find out general information about the things that are registered with RMAN. For example, RC archived log is pretty obvious, tells us about the archived logs. RC table space, RC data file. These three things here are giving us metadata about the things we're backing up, but it doesn't tell us when they were backed up. We're going to find out that information from the RC backup set and the RC backup piece. You can also see the time that the backup control file and the backup SP file completed. For example, you can say select DB name, completion time from RC backup control file. Since I only have one database registered, I don't have to have a where clause specifying which database I'm talking about. Also, the completion date, it's just showing the month, day, and year. If you want to alter your session and set the date format to be different, you can do that. For example, alter session, set NLS date format equals, and we can have it display the month, the day, the year, maybe the hours and the minutes as well. And then we can re-execute this statement up here. So this happened at 8:45 at night. You can do the same type of query for your backup SP file. So typically what I do, if I'm monitoring many different databases, I'll have a script that runs at really early in the morning, and it'll dig into these RC tables, and it'll generate a nice HTML report for me and email it out to me. So all I have to do is check my email and look for any red flags. In this nugget, we talked about using Recovery Manager to help back up your database. Remember, there's catalog mode and no catalog mode. Catalog mode is using a database to keep track of everything, whereas no catalog mode is using a control file to store your backup information. I showed you how to register your database, how to create the database first of all, and then to connect to the RMAN catalog. We configured RMAN, specifying our redundancy window, and also whether our default backups are going to be to disk or to tape, and whether we want to turn on certain features such as control file auto backup. Then we covered some basic RMAN commands. The most common one you'll be using is your backup. And then, of course, catalog and uncatalog to make the RMAN tables aware of your target database backups, as well as listing and reporting your backup information. Then we talked about RMAN data dictionary views that you can dig around into and see what has been backed up on which database, and this is going to be really useful if you want to generate some nice reports. This is also very helpful if you need to do a quick report for many databases at the same time without having to connect to each and every one of them. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.